Welcome, everybody, to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, your weekly podcast to catch up on the latest and greatest in the world of enterprise software sales, to get insights and to learn techniques to become a better seller. Whether you're a seasoned professional or new to the industry, please make our podcast your weekly place to get better as a seller. I'm Kevin Donville. I'm joined by my good friend, colleague, and partner in crime, Matt Long. Matt, how you doing this week, sir?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Thanks.
Now, together, Matt and I have over 50 years of experience with enterprise software selling and implementation, and we're very happy that you've joined this podcast with us today. This week, we've got a very interesting guest, a good friend of mine and Matt's as well, Dustin Chamberlain. Dustin, we're going to go and turn over the floor to you in just a second. But before we do, I want to remind everybody, if you like our podcast and you like the content we're coming up with, please like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know what you think about the content itself, because we want to make this your one-stop shop for the latest and greatest in software sales. Dustin, how are you doing, my friend? Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Matt. I'm doing pretty good.
Well, we're really glad that you agreed to come on the show today. You and I obviously have worked together for quite a few years in the past, and we've had more than our fair share of stories that we could be telling online. But the thing that really intrigued me about wanting to bring you on is you've got a very interesting story to talk about, because you actually started originally as a customer of software solutions in the space that we all work in, and then migrated over into the role that you have today. So I know a lot about you. I know you pretty well, but not a lot of folks that are listening to the call know that. So please take the floor, take a moment and tell people who you are and what you do and where you work.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll give you the 10,000 foot view. So practitioner turned pre-sales, right? I think that, maybe that's the title of this one. But at the end of the day, it couldn't be more true. Better part of 15 years starting my career at bestbuy.com and utilizing, kind of the OG tool along with other DevOps tools for site monitoring and website would be the Tea Leaf system. So administering that bad boy for many, many years under the yellow tag of Best Buy. And then again, continuing the practitioner, getting recruited over to Zappos.com, where they also needed some expertise. I know back in the day, a lot of people said, you basically needed a PhD in rocket science to administer Tea Leaf. And some days that was true, right? But the other thing I was reflecting on too, to kind of round this out, and I'm sure we'll talk about it maybe a little bit more, is a lot of people say when you go from practitioner to pre-sales or sales, I've gone to the dark side, right?
Yeah, that's the phrase, definitely.
That's the phrase. And I was reflecting on that thinking, I think it was just natural career progression along the way. And ultimately, multiple different companies and roles in the pre-sales side. And most recently, of many years there, once I came over to pre-sales, managing a team, coaching a team, and really enjoying that aspect of it the last couple of years.
Well, I know that that's kind of where you and I think we had a passing acquaintance with each other when you were at Best Buy and at Zappos. And I think that's where we first had our first touch base. And then, obviously a few years later, when I was running pre-sales at ClickTail, that's when you made the migration to come over. And I was approached not just by you, but advocates for you inside of our own sales organization. They're like, this would be a great guy to bring into our team. And I'm just curious, that's definitely switching to the other side of the table. We won't call it the dark side because I'm with you. I don't know if it necessarily qualifies. Yeah. But what was your experience like? Because you've already shared a little bit about it. Like sometimes you needed the science degree in order to be able to work with the solution. What was it about your customer experience that made you think, I think this is something I want to go into? Was there something good about it, something negative about it, or a mixture of both that made you think that would be an interesting career change?
Yeah, honestly, it's looking back at it, I heard, similar people say certain things to me along our interactions of different jobs, different coworkers. And what a lot of people had said, and I just never made the jump myself without the encouragement that you talked about, was you could sell anything you want. Insert analogy there. And I always took that as a compliment. I was passionate about it. I liked doing it. I kind of liked the mental hustle, if you will. And so really at the end of the day, making that transition, I think especially from the context of practitioner day to day on the client side, and then being able to provide maybe the services and value and vision that I know I would always want on the practitioner side, made it even that much easier for me to actually do the transition.
Yeah, Dustin, curious, what was your background prior to your role at Best Buy? Did you have a tech degree, or what did you study?
Yeah, it's funny, right? So I did a lot of things, right? I did a lot of testing out of different computer programs and classes, went down the path of audio recording engineering. And during that time, actually still working, maintaining part-time at Best Buy. And so it was one of those things where it's like, you got to make a decision. Are you going to go into computers hardcore? This whole internet and website thing was really heating up. Even Best Buy did a relaunch. I think they originally launched, and you can go back to the Wayback Machine, call it 97 or so when they launched, and then they relaunched and rebranded the website in early 2000 when it was the .com boom. And that's when I made the decision. It's like, all right, there's an in, I'm going in head first, technology, DevOps, online tools, monitoring, the whole deal. So that was a pivotal moment for me to just say, I'm a technologist. I was building my own computers, modding the computer cases with windows and lights. And, now you can buy those things. Back then you couldn't. You cut your fingers trying to make it look cool. But yeah, that's kind of the story there.
Well, that's great. I'm kind of reliving a little bit of that because I started also I started in the late 80s with PCs and stuff. So I had to date myself, but I'm sitting here with my desktop computer open on my desk as we speak, trying to fix some things. Like, it's bringing back all these bad memories from back then. But the interesting thing I found was that a lot of people in tech sales, whether it's pre-sales or AEs, didn't necessarily come from a tech background. That's why I'm always interested into what your journey was like. I think more so now these days, people are coming from tech and from programming and things into pre-sales.
Yeah.
But back in our day, I mean, Kevin, I think we talked about this before. You were pre-law.
Mm-hmm.
There's other people. I was an artist, right? I had a fine art degree. So I think there's a lot of skills that are inherent in the position that aren't really written down on paper. We find we need as part of the process to become a good seller.
Yep,
So.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think, just to add to that a little bit, reflecting on different trainings, different programs, everything that we all go through. If you're at a different company and then you go to another company, they've got a sales methodology, they've got a process, and all of it comes back down to kind of what you said, the different backgrounds and things that your experiences that you've had. There's definitely a skill set, right? That specific to pre-sales, whether it's spoken or unspoken, you need to have these particular skills, I think, to be successful.
Well, you're opening the door to the question then, right? So what are and I can hear Liam Neeson talking in the background right now. What are the particular set of skills that you're thinking about here? What's your formula? Do you think there is one?
Mm-hmm.
What makes a good pre-sales person from that perspective?
Absolutely. I think nowadays it's changed a little bit, right? But it hasn't in the same respect. You can have two different personas in the pre-sales role. Let's just say we've got type A and type B. Type A is going to be somebody that maybe has a little bit of that technical background. Maybe they've built a website. They know HTML and CSS, and they can get into the selectors and all of that great stuff a little bit, right? Knows some JavaScript, knows how to modify some of that code. And then you've got type B, where they don't necessarily have that technical background to what you were talking to, Matt, but they've got the other skill sets, right? So to your point, Kevin, I've got a very particular set of skills. That can be two completely different things, but what does need to cross-pollinate there is, man, there's a couple things in my mind. Emotional intelligence, listening skills, the ability to relate to the prospect or the client. And I say all of those things, again, coming from the practitioner side, from the spectrum of just being a super user, an admin, all the way to wearing multiple hats, where I'm essentially the champion, economic buyer, decision maker, all of those things that resulted in some cases in a really nice upsell renewal, even when I was on the prospecting side.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that it's just like making a sword, right? You have to amalgamate the right types of skills, and the people that can bring those different skills together are the folks that will excel in this role, right? I agree with everything that you said there about the fact that there's a type A and a type B, and I do think that they do need to learn how to play in each other's space, right?
Yes.
They need to learn how to come over to those different things. I always used to say when I was running teams, I can teach a non-tech person tech, and I can teach a tech person the philosophy and the psychology of selling.
Yeah.
But it's up to them to embrace it. And if they can't bring those together, there's going to be a gap. There's going to be a weakness. So I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. And just to add on to that really quick, Kevin, let's call it what it is. I mean, in my experience, it's easier to teach a non-technical person the technical skills to check the boxes A, B, and C. But in many cases, the other aspect, if you can't teach someone to be a salesperson, if you can't teach them you're always selling, right? You have to be get a technical champion, get a relationship together, have a rapport with those people. Those set of skills are the ones that sometimes ultimately you say, wow, well, I've tried to teach those, but this person, they just can't get it. Right?
Yeah, I'm curious, when you were a practitioner, were you part of the evaluation and purchasing team for these solutions? And if so, I'm just curious, what things did you pick up from the sales side in terms of things you liked or didn't like, or things that really hit home with you or didn't? And because I imagine that would be great information to have when you become a seller, right? Because then you know how these things come across. Because a lot of us have never really sat on that other side and been sold to.
Yeah.
Right? So what was your experience there?
Yeah, no, it's that's a great question, Matt. I think so. The answer is yes. And my experience, things have changed post-COVID. Travel isn't as prevalent as it once was. And so, but back when I was on the practitioner side, you got introduced to your AE that was managing the account. Many times they brought their boss, the RVP, and that happened multiple times, trying to tee things up for the inevitable renewal and the growth strategy of upsell, cross-sell. So I saw it unfold, but at the time I didn't know the process. I didn't know what was being done, so to speak. I got to say, it was a great process, a good eye opener. It was really in some aspects as traditional as you could think, right? We had a meeting, they came in, the pre-sales person at the time showcased some new features that we didn't quite have yet or didn't purchase yet. And hey, could you use this? Does it look valuable? And, I'm sitting there in the room like, yeah, like I'm the administrator at the time. I'm like, give me all the tools. This is exciting. And then you've got my boss in the time that was kind of teaching me the ropes on the practitioner side of sales in not so many words like, calm down, don't show all your cards here, right? And then as that process evolved, I became more of the decision maker, more of the budget holder, so to speak, and all the other aspects of that courtship, if you will, right? Hey, let's go out to lunch. Let's talk about the status. By the way, who's all available? Let's go out to a nice dinner. Those things really built relationships. And again, you're on site. Everybody's in the office. It's easy to do. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. It's like pulling teeth with disparate teams and everyone's remote. And so you have to go about it a little bit differently nowadays. But all that being said, my experience was really pretty good when I was on the practitioner side. I have no complaints. And now seeing it on the other side, I smile because I can pinpoint everything that took place up until the point where contract execution, everyone's happy, including the seller and everybody, right? His boss, whoever was forecasting that deal, the entire company.
So I get exactly what you're saying there. So now you've seen it through both sides and you've experienced it viscerally about what those two seats are like relative to their position and their point of view relative to closing software. So let's talk about something a little bit more fundamental to that then. How, in your mind, what is the contribution in that relationship? Because you're all getting, as they say, getting sweaty for the software solution. What is the contribution of pre-sales in the sales cycle to getting you as a stakeholder in that decision to that degree of excitement and engagement to the purchase?
Yeah, good question, Kevin. A lot of things come to mind immediately, and I'll just say a few of the words, the buzzwords in my brain. Trusted advisor, collaboration, technical resource. Ultimately, in some relationships, I can say from my past experiences, future friend, future colleague. These relationships that you're actually interacting with, we say it all the time, right? Like, man, it's a small world in software sales. And that's still true today, even though where I'm currently at in my vertical, yes, there's competition. There's a handful of players in the space. That's true for anybody. And so, again, just seeing what I've seen, never burn a bridge, because you've got an ecosystem of people that you need to sometimes rely on or definitely want to keep reaching out to.
So let me follow up on that, because I get what you're saying implicitly, because I've walked the walk. So has Matt. But for anybody who maybe hasn't walked the pre-sales road, they may have a hard time understanding that. So, you're talking about, you call them out as buzzwords. How do you become that trusted advisor as a pre-sales person? What are some of the tactics that you get engaged with?
Yes. Speaking from my experience, I was very lucky. I got attached to some really good sellers to start. And you have to be, we talk about skills for pre-sales. You have to be coachable. I'm not the best. Nobody on my team is the best. Nobody that's watching this video is the best. Have some humility, right? And so I think at the end of the day, those skills of always being able to improve or know that there's always something you could change. If don't ever get set in your ways. I know, especially Kevin, you and I have probably had this conversation in the past. Like, switch it up. If it feels good and it feels comfortable, that's great. If it's continuing to work and progress things for the deals, even better. But in that one instance where it starts to go off the rails, you adapt and change and flip the script, right? And again, those are the hard skills, because everybody likes to just stay in their comfort zone.
Yeah. I mean, in enterprise sales, obviously, usually there's an AE and an SE at a minimum working together, right? And you're both selling. The nice thing about the SE is you're kind of covert sales. So
That's right.
you automatically have a position of trust much more than the AE. So taking that in mind, what activities and what sort of motions does pre-sales take that are really critical, do you think, to advancing enterprise deals? Because I've seen it where the AE just taps and the SE is just doing demos and answering technical things. That works sometimes. I don't think it's as effective. So what would you say a really good SE or team of AE and SE would look like?
Absolutely. So the key structure there to your question, Matt, is plan, prep, dry run, right? And what I mean by that is a killer duo of the SE-AE pairing is going to be open to that feedback, adapt and change your plan before you meet with the prospect or the customer. So prep call, maybe it's multiple prep calls, maybe it's a dry run. And, at the end of the day, here's the key part to that. Remember, in enterprise pre-sales, we've got a 4-to-1 ratio, usually minimum, if not more sometimes. So talk about visibility, at-bats, and the ability to understand what works. That AE or that partner, they only have a purview of their deals, their pipeline, and what they're comfortable with. So it goes both ways. As I said, it's very important for pre-sales to be adaptable, coachable. Man, to have a good team, it's just as important for the AE to understand that their pre-sales gets a lot more visibility across the entire company of what's really going on in the ecosystem on the given day, instead of it could have been a week, or hopefully not a week plus, but since the AEs had an interaction with a prospect.
So that being the case, all right, and I understand that we used to refer to it as the dance sometimes in our conversations, right? We had the dance between the AE and as that partnership gets enriched, the dance becomes more elegant and becomes more smooth, to continue the analogy. That being the case, and now that you've sat in the manager's chair for a little while now, curious as to your perspective on this. In preparation for that happening, you see organizations hiring on the AE side and hiring on the pre-sale side. What do you think is the biggest mistake that organizations, the most common mistake that they make with respect to who and how they're recruiting their pre-sales people.
Yep. It goes back to what we had talked about a little bit earlier, in my opinion, where, the persona that I see some of these job descriptions, right? They come across on LinkedIn or whatever. The persona some of these companies are looking for, it's like a PhD in rocket science and has built, 75 websites using AI generation and AI compute. And it's like, what do you think this is? You need someone that, like we said, has the soft skills, right? And if you've got the soft skills, the rest of that for any given company and their technology stack for what they're trying to sell is learnable, is teachable, right? To your point, Kevin. And so the persona is very important, especially even when they're interviewing. Like, make sure that you have a wide range of interview panelists, like pre-sales directors, managers, really coworkers, because everyone's going to pick up on something different. And whether you get the red pen out or the green pen on what you did or didn't like about that person in the moment, there's going to be some red flags of like, I think this is the wrong persona here. I don't know what we're trying to hire.
Well, with that having been said, so it's like you're definitely picking up, I think, on some of the changes, the gross changes overall in all aspects of selling that are happening in the market right now. What are some of the changes that you can call it specifically from your role as being a pre-sales person? What's really changing the most with respect to selling enterprise software today? What are some of the biggest deltas you're seeing?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, and it doesn't matter what vertical it is, quite honestly. Everybody's trying to eat each other's lunch, right? The competition is getting fiercer. The differentiators are getting minimalized because whether it be funding or otherwise, everyone's got to be almost at status quo or at par to be able to take that market share. So it's getting difficult, more difficult, right? And you have to be able to reference sell better, talk about the differentiators, and in the moment, kind of on the fly, if we talk about that persona, and this goes back to even in my current role, like coaching, reviewing calls, picking up on those nuances, you have to be able to adapt on the fly, and you have to be convincing, and you have to be sincere. They know that the AE is the sales guy or gal, and you're not. You can be real. How many times have I been on a call or you guys have been on a call and the AE said something and you cringe and you maybe looked at the camera like, did they just say that? And then you have to say, actually, you're right. He's absolutely right. But here's how it actually is. And here's how we actually do it. We can still get to the same end result. Don't get me wrong. But technically, no, not this, but this. So delicately correction of some statements that might have been said. But again, that goes back to you get on discovery calls nowadays, or you get on demonstration calls where they can go off the rails quickly if you've got a detractor on the call. And you have to be able to adapt and change and know the ecosystem almost down to the minute of what somebody else is offering or what somebody else is saying in an RFP, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there was a saying back in the day, I don't know where I heard it first, but like 2%. It's just a 2% difference between you and your competition. And how are you going to maximize or how are you going to differentiate? Usually it's not because of product or features or things like that. It's sales execution, right? Are you responsive? Do you listen? Do you give them the things and the answers they're looking for? All these different types of things I think really make a difference. And I think today more so than ever, right? It's like like on paper, all the products look the same. This one has a little this one has a little that, but it's like, it's pretty much the same thing. So it comes down to, do they trust you? Do they want to do business with you? Are you a company that they feel comfortable going into partnership with for long term?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you feeling that as well, but that's certainly what I picked up towards the end there.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point. You just made me think about it back to when I was on the practitioner side and getting sold to, right? That dance started, and sure, it was in person and travel was a thing and everybody was in the office, but it spoke volumes when they always showed up. And when it got closer to time to execute on the contract and make sure that everybody's feeling comfortable, man, just everyone coming in every week. How you doing? In some cases, and this actually happened, you need to deploy the SWAT team, right? I need 5 people to come in and find some earth-shattering recommendations so that we can solidify this upsell potential with our current customer. And to your point, Matt, I see the exact same thing today. It's, what does the ecosystem look like? Is the company investing enough in the resources and the teams to do that dance that we talk about, to be able to make them feel warm and fuzzy, and that we're not going to be out of business tomorrow. We're in it with you. We're just as we have just as much skin in the game as you do, even though, obviously we want them to sign the check.
From that perspective then, Dustin, do you think that, so like, again, we've said this before in some of our other episodes prior to you joining us today, with the more things change, the more they stay the same with respect to some of the challenges people are having. And what you're talking about there is classic value selling to the organization. But based on the perception and I would say the velocity at which sales cycles are moving at today, do you think that there is an increased or a decreased demand on the pre-sales person? Do you think their importance is increasing, or do you think it's we're not as important as we used to be in the sales cycle?
So I'll answer that in 2 ways. The first one is the most accurate way right out of the gate, which is increasingly more and more critical and important for the sales cycle. And it goes back to the personas that we talked about, the skills. If we talk about the ramp in general for any company, the ramp for an account executive is, I'm going to call it, just for easy math, 25% of the ramp it takes to get a pre-sales professional up to speed at any company, right? And once you're there, pre-sales is usually there for the long haul. We see this through. We like the technology. There's other reasons why we're bought into it. And then the other aspect to that is, again, look at, I think it was Salesforce or some company announced, like, they're moving away from account executives. They're going to take their best and their brightest pre-sales and morph them into the new account executives. So if you have a pre-sales background and you're a trusted advisor and you've got that emotional intelligence and you can speak the language, well, now you're an AE at Salesforce. I'm pretty sure it was Salesforce, but that's my point. That's how important that role is.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you have an opportunity to choose whether to become an AE or an SE at the company? And why did you choose to stay an SE, I guess?
Yeah. That's funny. That's a good question.
He's actually blushing.
I am, because it goes back to, remember when everyone kept telling me, like, man, you could sell anything to anybody. And inherently, I like it. It's a passion. I get excited about it. It's kind of like the chase. But I'm also a self-proclaimed technologist, right? And there is something to be said about wanting to stay the course of being true to who you are and ultimately being that trusted advisor. I like building those relationships, not to discount the other path. I've seen great AEs have the longevity and the consistent relationships for years and in the future with their customers and their prospects. So it's not that. It's just that I like the balance of being able to be, the go-to guy with the answers. And when I say something, someone's like, well, obviously that's correct because it's coming out of Dustin's mouth, right? Versus if I'm perceived as a seller, people might second guess me. And I don't, maybe in the back of my mind, I'm like, you know what? I'm not ready to make that jump. I want to continue to be the expert that I feel proud about.
Makes perfect sense. So what would you say then is what's been guiding your career path now? Because now you're up in management and leading teams. What's kind of the guiding principle through your career path now?
That's a great question. I think the progression has been, because again, it's even different than being in the field every day, right? And so to your point, Kev, the passions have turned the table a little bit. Now, since my experiences of all different kinds of management, right, in the field, RVPs, everybody you interact with, you gain a lot of insights and you gain a lot of good things to remember. And so now managing a team, and this is what I strive for every day. This is why I log in. It's to be the coach, to be someone that somebody is willing to pick up the phone because they know I can talk to Dustin about this, or I can bounce the idea. If nobody's available and I've got time on my calendar, let's you and me do that dry run, right? I'll give you critical feedback. I'll give you kudos where I see you absolutely crushed it, because everybody needs that too. And I want to be the type of leader that continues to exemplify what people want when they're in a job.
Well, that being the case, what would you say is kind of if someone came to you right now and said, hey, I'm thinking about going to pre-sales, what kind of advice would you pass along to them? What kind of direction would you give them?
Yeah. Depending on where they are and where they are with the skill sets that we've talked about, I would double down on that. And I would say if it was an internal candidate trying to transfer from a different department, that's a little different than external, but the same principles apply, right? Let's assess why you want to do that, why that's in your thought process. And then I can either help you prove or disprove what you think. I've heard your career has been kind of crazy, right? A little windy road, and you're here now. How is it and why? And so to kind of finish that thought process and answer to you, Kevin, I think just make sure that people, A, know what they're getting into, B, have the passion, because, if you're in a pre-sales role, you're a passionate person, and you're willing to, let's just say, be patient and understand that you have to sometimes take deep breaths along the way and then start it all over again, right? Because we all deal with different personalities, and that's another piece of this. You have to be able to put all of your mental angst aside and be a professional and show up every day to be able to execute, whether you can finish each other's sentences and you're the dynamic duo, or you guys just, do your prep work, you're on a call, you do your post analysis, and that's it. You don't really interact outside of those key check boxes for working an opportunity.
Yeah, one of the most defining questions, I think, of our time right now in software sales is the use of AI, right? Not only in, creating software and all the different functions around that, but also in the sales process. I'm just curious, from your perspective as a sales manager, how much do you use AI, or where do you see AI helping in either sales execution or even sales management of the pre-sales process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. From the sales management process and my particular role, I'm starting to see it in the coaching tools, right? The co-pilots and the gongs, where I still want to be able to provide that valuable feedback, and we need to do our checks and balances, right? But we get the AI summaries. We get the cliff notes of how the call went, and now they're getting into the part where they can even pull out the buzzwords. Are they talking about this enough? In general, are they talking too much compared to the prospect? Now, if it's a demo, that's one thing. But if you see all the calls and, your particular pre-sales person is doing fine, but you actually see a red flag on the AE and they're going through 50 slides and they've used 40 minutes of a 60-minute call, hey, that's a different coaching opportunity. So it doesn't matter what the use case, those uses of AI are actually becoming more and more valuable for sure.
And on the execution side, as they're prepping, because I remember I used to write a lot of white papers and, kind of business summaries and things like that. And it's a lot of work, right? It was a lot of work to do. I've just recently started just using AI more and more and find out, if you give it really good prompts and stuff like that, you can actually get it pretty close to what you want in a fraction of the time, right? So are there particular deliverables from the SE perspective or things that they can use AI for now that you're seeing?
Yeah, so, I can't remember the name of it, but yes, RFP response tool database. So keep feeding the machine all the data and it'll start to be able to recognize, scan, and give you the proper results. And that's another thing that was still can be, depending on the format, a huge time suck. We talk about the ups and the downs of being a pre-sales professional. Responding to security reviews and RFPs is not one of them. And so if you've got one of those tools, as we do, as long as you can feed it enough valid data, that definitely starts to shorten those cycles, and you don't have to worry about that as much as carving out a day plus of your time to get it done.
Well, it's interesting you would say that, because I know that there's a group there's a voice out there in the industry right now that thinks that pre-sales can be supplemented, if not fully replaced, by using AI tools, and that doesn't need to be a component of their go-to-market strategy. That being, what would you say? I have a very strong response for people who say that. You can probably well imagine, but what would be your response to people who think that they can do that?
I would say listen to this podcast. I mean, I think I've given 50 plus examples of why that won't work. And again, right persona, right passion to be in the role, all of that has to apply. But no, there's no way. I mean, just the way the technology evolves within somebody's company, think about that. You talked about it, Matt, just now with being able to build white papers and stuff. Think about their marketing departments. Think about all these other departments that are responsible for some of that content. Like, no, who's going to do it? There's no way. And I've used Chat GPT and optimized some things with some prompts. It still is not perfect. It's far from perfect. And so if you put it in the context, Kevin, essentially replacing the pre-sales role, I would really just have to laugh for the rest of this podcast. Can't be done.
I'm with you. And I remember somebody asked me that question not too long ago on a podcast I was a guest on. And my perspective was, when you're dealing with a pre-sales person, you're dealing with a person who's an interesting hybrid. On the one hand, coin operated, as you say, they like the hunt, they like to chase the deal. And on the other hand, you have a person who has to solve the problem. They have to solve the puzzle. That is just as much, and in some cases, more of the motivation behind what drives every action that a pre-sales person is engaged with in that sales cycle. They want to ferret out the reasons. They want to understand the minutia, the detail, the consequences. So when you turn around as the pre-sales person and give the story back to the customer, you're building a narrative that explains precisely why that customer needs your solution, and you're doing it in their terms, and you're saying it not because the financial reward, although it's definitely in there, but because you solved the puzzle, you got the answer, right? And that's not something you can say that AI is going to be able to do.
Not only that, but if you're talking about it in the context of just replacing the role, right? Let's take it a step further. We all know this to be true. Pre-sales has the additional skill set, once they've been in the role, of essentially they could step in and be the implementation team. They could be the customer success team. They could be, all of these departments, because ultimately those are the hats that, given a scenario in a particular sales cycle or upsell, cross-sell, you have to put that hat on. Because if you're at a customer and they're saying, well, not only do we not want to add additional capabilities from your company, we're actually not seeing that much value from your company for the last 6 months. Shocker, right? It happens. And then they put on the customer success hat and say, why? What's going on? Is it adoption? Well, no, we just haven't been able to get this one thing to work that you showed us when you sold it to us. And we've been going back and forth with support or customer success. And then to your point, Kevin, in the moment, well, I just fixed that for you. It took me 2 seconds because I know. Now are we good? Is this going to help you? Oh my gosh. Yes. Where have you been? I should have kept you on the account the entire time and had daily calls with you. But that's the type of trusted advisor wearing multiple hats that you ultimately get in the persona and the position of a pre-sales professional.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. It's that flexibility and versatility and willingness to help that I think that makes the big difference. Dustin, I would love to keep talking all afternoon with you, and we have done this before for hours and hours on end together face to face, but we do need to bring our episode to a close. One of the things I'd love for you to do is, if people want to reach out to you and discuss more about what it means to be a pre-sales person, what is the right mix of skills, and how can organizations do that better? How can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. Easiest is, and I think you can share this, just link in with me, right?
Absolutely. We'll put that in the description. The link to your profile will be right there in the description. So if people want to reach out to the big brain that is Dustin Chamberlain, they will be able to do so.
Let's do it. Connect. And I'm here as a resource and to bounce questions for anyone that's curious.
Well, Dustin, thank you very much for coming in and answering our questions in today's episode. But folks, that is a wrap on our episode today. Matt, anything you'd like to say to Dustin or before we go and wrap up for the day?
No, it was just great catching up, Dustin. It's been a while, so I'm glad we could have this conversation today.
Likewise. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
It was definitely great catching up. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you liked what you saw today, listen to, go ahead, like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know what else you would like us to bring onto the show, other topics, and so forth. And if you would like to know more about the methodology you hear Matt and I talking about all the time on the call, by all means, please go to our website. You can download and buy a copy of the book right there. Winning Faster, the MOVE framework for enterprise software sales success. You'll be able to get it right there off of our website. But folks, it's been a pleasure. Dustin, thank you for being here. Matt, as always, sir, it's great talking with you. Can't wait to have another conversation with you next week, where we'll have another guest right here on our show. And until then, everybody, take care. Have a great week.